The envelope was already open when Miriam found it on the kitchen table. Her mother had not even tried to hide it. The letter sat there, unsealed, the top folded back like a turned-down page in a book someone had no intention of returning. Miriam stood in the doorway of the small kitchen in the house she had grown up in, still wearing her coat, her bag still on her shoulder, and she looked at the letter the way you look at something you already know is going to change the shape of your day. She was 19 years old. She had just come home from her second week of university. She did not go back. That is where the story begins, not with a dramatic speech or a tearful decision. It begins with a 19-year-old girl reading a letter from the hospital, reading the words, chronic condition and ongoing support required, and doing a very quiet calculation in her head. The calculation took less than a minute. It ended with her walking to the telephone and calling the university's administration office to ask about a leave of absence. She told herself it was temporary. Everyone in that house told themselves the same thing. 21 years passed. Miriam O.C. did not spend those years sitting still. She worked, first in a pharmacy 2 streets from the house, then as an administrator for a community health center, then as the coordinator for a nonprofit that helped families navigate the complicated paperwork that comes when a parent becomes ill, and the system that is supposed to help them makes it harder instead of easier. She was good at all of it. She was the kind of person who understood what was needed before you finished explaining it, who remembered the details other people forgot, who showed up without being asked and stayed without being told. At work, people called her indispensable. At home, she was simply expected. There is a difference between those two things, though it took Miriam many years to feel it. Being indispensable means someone would miss you if you were gone. Being expected means no one considers the possibility that you might leave. Miriam's family did not consider it. Her younger brother Kofi, who was 14 when she came home from university, and 23 when he left for his first job, and 31 when he finally got himself settled, had grown up watching his sister arrange everything. He had never once seen her fail to arrange something. He had, therefore, never once believed there was a version of the world in which she could not or would not. Her mother, whose name was Grace, and who had lived with a difficult heart condition for over 2 decades, loved Miriam in the particular way that people love the ground beneath their feet. Thoroughly, without examination, without gratitude exactly. Because gratitude implies the possibility of things being otherwise, and Grace had stopped imagining otherwise a long time ago. Miriam's flat was 20 minutes from her mother's house. She had moved there when she was 28, which felt, at the time, like an enormous act of independence. She had chosen the flat herself. She had furnished it herself. She had painted the walls a warm cream color that she liked. But she kept her spare key on the hook by the door, and her mother's number was the first one in her phone, and she visited 4 times a week, and when she did not visit she called, and when she called, she listened for the particular note in her mother's voice that meant something needed doing. Her flat did not look like somewhere a person lived. It looked like somewhere a person slept between useful activities. The furniture was practical. The cushions on the sofa had been chosen because they were easy to clean. The kitchen was well stocked but not with anything indulgent. There was no wine in the house because she had never gotten around to learning what she liked. There were no flowers because they required attention and she was too tired, most evenings, to give attention to things that were not already demanding it. There was one photograph on the wall, a picture of her and Kofi taken at his graduation, and in it Miriam was smiling in the way she always smiled in photographs, which is to say warmly, and from a place slightly outside the moment. She was 39 years old. She had not been on a proper holiday in 11 years. She had not read a novel for pleasure in longer than she could remember. She owned 3 dresses that were not black and had not worn any of them. She had a jar of expensive hand cream on her bedside table that had been a gift 2 Christmases ago and was still sealed. None of this struck her as sad. That is perhaps the most important thing to understand about where Miriam was at 39. She was not miserable. She was not resentful, or not often, or not in a way she examined. She was simply occupied. She had been occupied for so long that she had stopped noticing the occupation. She had filled every corner of her life with someone else's need and, when she tried to look for her own, she could not quite locate it. It was like reaching for something in a bag that was very full. You knew it was in there. You just kept finding other things. The shift began, as most real shifts do, not with a single moment, but with a slow series of small changes that only look connected when you look back at them. Her mother's health stabilized, not dramatically, not in a way that called for celebration, but in the quiet, clinical way that means the crisis is no longer a crisis. The new medication was working. The hospital appointments became fewer. Grace began going to a weekly gentle exercise group at the community center, which she had resisted for 2 years and then suddenly embraced, And she came home from those sessions talking about a woman named Dorothy who had apparently very strong opinions about proper tea. Kofi got a job. A real one, not the string of part-time things he had been navigating for years, but a permanent position at a logistics firm in Birmingham. He called Miriam to tell her, and she heard something in his voice she had not heard before, something steady and self-contained, and she realized with a quiet start that he was going to be all right. That she had always known he was going to be all right, that perhaps she had simply needed to wait for him to know it too. The nonprofit restructured. Miriam's role contracted from 5 days to 4. It was presented as a budget measure, apologetically, and her manager looked guilty delivering the news. Miriam accepted it with complete composure and walked back to her desk and sat very still for a moment, looking at the calendar on her screen. Thursday. She now had every Thursday free. She did not know what to do with a Thursday. That is not a small thing to admit. Most people, offered an unexpected free day, would fill it without thinking, a list of things they had been meaning to do, a friend to call, a place to visit, a pleasure deferred. Miriam sat at her desk on the first free Thursday she had been given in decades, and felt something that she could not immediately name. It was not quite anxiety. It was not quite grief. It was the feeling of a person who has been carrying a very heavy bag for a very long time, and has just been told to put it down, and who discovers, in the act of putting it down, that they have forgotten how to walk without the weight of it. She went home. She made tea. She stood at her kitchen window and looked at the street below for a long time without seeing it. Then she opened her laptop and typed, slowly, into the search bar, things to do alone on a weekend in London. The results came back full of restaurant recommendations and walking tours and museum exhibitions she had never considered attending. She scrolled through them. She stopped at one. The description was unremarkable. A community event, a fundraiser for a local housing initiative, held in a church hall in Lewisham on a Saturday afternoon. There would be food. There would be music. There would be, the listing said, a silent auction. She almost did not register it. She scrolled past it. Then she scrolled back. She did not know why. She could not have explained it. But she wrote down the date. On the Saturday of the event, she almost did not go. She had reasons not to. Her mother had mentioned a pain in her shoulder that turned out to be nothing. Kofi had sent a text asking if she knew where their father's old documents were stored. There was laundry. There were a dozen small, quiet reasons to stay where she was, in the flat she had built for usefulness, doing the things she had always done. She went anyway. She put on one of the 3 dresses that were not black. It was a deep green one, bought 2 years ago for a work function she had attended and then hurried home from. She looked at herself in the mirror for longer than she usually did. She did not know what she was looking for. She picked up her bag and went out the door before she could think about it any further. She was 39 years old, and she had no idea that the day she almost skipped would turn out to be the day her life began to quietly rearrange itself into something she actually recognized. She was just going to a church hall in Lewisham. She was just going out alone on a Saturday afternoon. She was, without knowing it yet, setting something in motion that 21 years of careful, selfless, responsible living had never once allowed her to begin. The church hall in Lewisham smelled like warm bread and someone's grandmother's perfume, and the moment Miriam stepped through the door she thought about turning around. Not because anything was wrong. Nothing was wrong. The room was bright, the tables were covered in the kind of cheerful mismatched cloth that suggests genuine community effort rather than professional event planning, and the sound of voices overlapped in a comfortable, undemanding way. It was a perfectly pleasant room full of perfectly pleasant people, and Miriam, standing at the edge of it in her green dress, felt the familiar pull of the exit. She was not good at rooms like this. She was good at rooms where she had a job to do. She was good at rooms where there was a problem to solve or a form to explain or a person to guide through something complicated. She was not good at rooms where the only thing required of her was to be present and enjoy herself. She stayed anyway. She told herself she would give it an hour. She found the tea table first, because that is always the easiest thing to find at a British community event. She poured herself a cup and held it with both hands and looked around the room the way she always looked around rooms, which is to say she looked for what needed doing. There was a woman near the silent auction table who was struggling to pin up a printed sign. There was an older man by the door who had no cup and no plate and looked uncertain. There were 3 children running between the table legs with the single-minded joy of children who have been told to behave and are doing the opposite. She did not help with any of it. She noticed this. She made herself notice it. She was not here to help. She was here to be. Being was harder than helping. Helping was something she had been trained for by 2 decades of practice. Being required something else entirely, something less practiced, something that had gone unused so long it had stiffened at the joints. She drifted toward the auction table. The items on offer were the usual assortment of local business donations, restaurant vouchers and spa mornings and a weekend at a cottage in Kent. She looked at them all carefully because looking carefully at things was something she could do without it being obvious that she did not know what to do with herself. She was examining a voucher for a pottery class when she became aware of someone standing near her, not uncomfortably close. Just near. She registered the presence without looking up. "The pottery class is actually worth it," the person said. "The instructor is from somewhere in the Southwest and she has a genuinely alarming amount of energy for someone who works with clay, but the results are impressive." Miriam looked up. The man standing next to her was perhaps a few years older than her, with a quiet face and the kind of build that suggested he had once been in good shape and still was, though without any particular effort about it. He was wearing a dark jumper and holding a cup of tea with the ease of a man who was entirely comfortable standing in a room without needing to perform comfort. He was looking at the pottery voucher with a mild, genuine interest, as though it were a thing worth considering rather than a thing he was using as an excuse to begin a conversation. Miriam was not used to people who were easy to read. She found it slightly disarming. "You've done the pottery class?" she said. "My daughter did. For her birthday last year. She made a bowl that she described as intentional, and that I would describe as lopsided, but she was very proud of it." He said this without self-consciousness, in the easy way of a person who had no anxiety about being a parent in the company of strangers. "That's a good distinction," Miriam said. "Intentional. She's 8. She has a lot of very firm opinions." There was a pause, but it was a comfortable pause, the kind that does not need filling. Miriam looked back at the voucher and then at the rest of the table. She was aware that the conversation could end here, and that would be fine, and she was also aware that she did not particularly want it to. "Is she here?" she asked. "Your daughter?" "She's with her grandparents today." He said it simply, without elaboration, and moved on. "Are you from Lewisham?" "Peckham, originally. I live in Peckham now, actually. I'm in Bristol. A friend organizes this event every year. I try to come when I can." He said his name was Edmund. Edmund Adeyemi Clark. He said it the way people say names that belong to them completely, without apology for the length of it. Miriam told him her name and he said it back correctly on the first try, which was not something everyone managed. They talked for a while about the event, about the housing initiative it was raising money for, about the particular difficulties of finding affordable housing in London versus the particular difficulties of finding anything at all in Bristol. Edmund spoke about buildings the way people speak about things they genuinely think about, not just things they do for money. He mentioned a project his firm had been working on, restoring a row of Victorian terraced houses that had been left empty for 12 years. He described the original cornice work with a brief, focused enthusiasm that reminded Miriam, unexpectedly, of the way her mother described photographs from her own childhood. Miriam found herself talking more than she usually talked at events. Not about herself, not exactly, but about her work, about the families she helped, about the particular frustration of watching people fall through the gaps of a system that had been designed by people who had never once fallen through a gap themselves. She said this last thing and then immediately felt that it was too much, that she was too much, that she had said something a little too direct for a church hall in Lewisham on a Saturday afternoon. Edmund did not look as though it was too much. He looked as though he was listening, actually listening, not in the polite way where a person holds eye contact and waits for their turn to speak, but in the way where their expression shifts slightly, because something you have said has given them something to think about. "That's the problem with most systems," he said. "They're designed by people who understand the system, not the people who need it." "Exactly," she said, and felt for a moment the small warmth of being understood. Later she would wonder if it was that moment, that quiet exchange over a plastic table in a church hall, that had changed something. She would not be able to say for certain. She was not someone who believed in single moments. She believed in accumulation, in the way things build slowly until they cannot be ignored. But that moment had something in it, a frequency she had not heard in a long time. A volunteer came around with a tray of sandwiches and Miriam, without thinking, took the tray from her. "Let me," she said automatically, and began moving around the table, offering sandwiches to the people nearby. She did not notice what she had done until Edmund said, quietly, from behind her, "You just took that tray." She turned. He was watching her with a look that was not quite amusement, and not quite something else, just attention. "Force of habit," she said. "I noticed," he said. "You've refilled 3 cups since we've been standing here. You moved a chair so that older gentlemen near the door had somewhere to sit, and now the sandwiches." She did not know what to say. She felt a flicker of something, not quite embarrassment, not quite being caught at something, but close to both. "I'm not criticizing," he said quickly. "I'm just noticing." People usually don't notice, she said. I know, he said. I think that's the point. She handed the tray back to the volunteer and stood very still for a moment. It was a strange thing, being noticed in a way that was not about what you could do. She was used to being noticed for her efficiency, her reliability, her capacity. She was not used to being noticed in the way Edmund was noticing her, which was carefully, and without any intention of using what he saw. They talked until the event wound down. When people began folding the mismatched tablecloths and stacking the chairs, Edmund wrote his number on the back of a folded program and handed it to her. He did not say, "Call me," or "We should do this again." He said, "It was genuinely good to talk to you," in a tone that left room for her to decide what to do with that information. She walked back to her car in the early evening light. The green dress caught the last of the day's warmth. In her hand was a folded program with a number on the back of it. She sat in the car for a long moment. Then she drove home, and sat in her flat, and made herself dinner, and looked at the program on the table beside her plate. She did not call him that evening. She did not call him the next day. She sat with the feeling of the afternoon the way you sit with a song that is still in your head, not trying to analyze it, just letting it be there. On Tuesday evening, she typed a short message. She said it had been good to talk to him as well. She said she hoped the drive back to Bristol had been straightforward. He replied within 20 minutes. He said the drive had been fine. He said his daughter had made the lopsided bowl into a pen holder, and it was now on his desk. He said he hoped her week was going well. It was a small message. Ordinary. The kind that is exchanged between people who are beginning, very carefully, to find their way towards something they do not yet have a name for. Miriam read it 3 times. Then she put her phone down and did the dishes, and when she went to bed she lay in the dark for a while, looking at the ceiling, feeling something she had not felt in a very long time. It was not happiness exactly. It was the edge of possibility. The sense of a door that has been closed so long you forgot it was a door, and someone has just knocked on the other side of it. She did not know yet if she would open it. She only knew that she had heard the knock. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not immediately walk away from it. The second time Edmund came to London, he told her about it 3 days in advance. He sent a message on a Wednesday evening, brief and direct, saying he had a meeting in the city on the following Saturday morning, and asking if she might like to get lunch afterward, if she was free. Miriam read the message at the kitchen table, a half-drunk cup of tea going cold in front of her. The question was simple enough. Lunch on a Saturday. She was almost always free on Saturdays because she had, without making a deliberate decision about it, arranged her life in a way that kept most of her time available for other people's emergencies. A Saturday lunch should have been easy to say yes to. She sat with it for 2 days. She told herself she was being sensible. She told herself she was thinking it through. What she was actually doing, though she could not have said it in those words at the time, was waiting for a reason not to go. She was giving the rest of her life a window to produce something that required her. She was listening for her mother's particular voice on the phone, or for Kofi to send a message that actually needed answering, or for something at work to come up. Nothing came up. On Friday evening she replied and said yes. She chose, again, to wear the green dress. She changed her mind twice, put it back on, told herself she was being ridiculous, and left before she could change her mind a 3rd time. They met outside a small restaurant in Bermondsey that Edmund had found and recommended, and when she arrived he was already there, standing outside with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the building with the focused expression of a man who is thinking about the age of the brickwork. He saw her come around the corner and his face shifted into something easier. "You found it," he said. "I grew up in South London," she said. "I can find anything in South London." He smiled. They went in. Lunch lasted 2.5 hours. Neither of them appeared to notice the time passing. They talked about his work and her work, and the strange, particular satisfaction of doing something that is genuinely useful. Edmund talked about a building his firm had finished that previous autumn, a set of almshouses that had been derelict for 30 years, now fully restored and occupied by a mix of elderly residents and young families. He described walking through the finished building on the day the residents moved in, and there was something in the way he said it that told Miriam this was what the work was actually about for him. Not the restoration itself, but what the restoration made possible. She told him about a family she had helped the previous year, a mother with 3 young children navigating a housing benefit dispute that had been going on for 14 months when Miriam's organization got involved. She described the morning the dispute was resolved, the particular sound the mother had made on the phone when Miriam told her. She did not say what kind of sound it was because there was no word for it. Edmund listened and did not try to fill the space after she finished. "Do you ever get tired of it?" he asked. "The work." She considered the question honestly. "I get tired," she said. Not of the work exactly. Of the distance between what people need and what they actually get. There's a difference, he said. Yes, she said, there is. Between the main course and the coffee, he told her about his wife. He did not preamble it or warn her it was coming. He simply said, in the same quiet, direct way he said most things, that his wife had died 4 years ago, a long illness, and that it had been the hardest thing he had been through, and that his daughter had been 4 years old at the time, and had handled it with a grace that still made him catch his breath when he thought about it. Miriam did not say I'm sorry in the reflexive way people say it, which often means little more than I have acknowledged what you said. She said, what was her name? He looked at her. Caroline, he said. She sounds like she made good decisions, Miriam said, meaning the daughter and the woman who had raised her. Both of them, he said. She did not know, in that moment, what she felt. Something careful, something that wanted to be more careful still. But she noticed that she did not look away, and that he did not either, and that the restaurant had grown quieter around them without their noticing. After lunch they walked along the river for a while. It was a cold afternoon, bright and sharp-aired. The Thames moved beside them with the indifferent steadiness of very old things. They walked without urgency. Do you ever go anywhere, he asked. For yourself, I mean. Holiday or just anywhere. She thought about this. I went to Edinburgh once, for a work conference. I said for yourself. She looked at the river. No, she said, not really, not in a long time. Why not? She started to give the practical answer, the one about her mother's health and the difficulty of timing and the way work tended to expand into whatever space she left open for it. She heard herself giving this answer and stopped halfway through it. I don't really know, she said, which was more honest than the other answer and harder to say. He did not comment on this. He did not offer a solution or a gentle observation about the importance of self-care. He simply walked beside her for a few moments and then said, there's a very good concert series in Bristol in the spring. The acoustics in the venue are unreasonably good for the size of it. I'll send you the listing if you like. It was such a small offer, so completely undemanding. It left every choice entirely with her. She felt something in her chest, a small loosening, like the first thread of a knot finally going slack. I'd like that, she said. He sent her the listing 3 days later with no additional message. Just the link, and below it, a short line. There's a Saturday date in April if that works. She looked at the listing. She looked at the April date. She thought about the drive to Bristol, about a free Saturday, about the green dress and the river, and the particular ease of sitting across a table from someone who listened, in the way that Edmund listened. She thought about all the reasons she might find not to go. Then she wrote back. She said the April date looked good. She put her phone down and noticed, distantly, that her hands were not quite steady. Not with dread, with something else entirely. The feeling of a person who has just made a decision for no other reason than that she wanted to, and has discovered, in the making of it, how unfamiliar that particular feeling has become. The weeks between her reply and the April concert were not quiet weeks. Her mother had a bad patch in February, not a crisis but several difficult weeks, and Miriam found herself at the family house more often than usual, making meals, driving to appointments, sitting with Grace in the evenings and watching the programs her mother liked. She did not resent it. She never resented it, but she noticed, for the first time, a new thing alongside the not resenting. She noticed that she was counting the days to April. That was new. She had not counted toward anything in a very long time. Kofi came to visit in early March. He sat in her small flat with his long legs taking up too much of the sofa and talked about his new job and his new flat in Birmingham, and a woman he had recently met whose name he mentioned 3 times in 20 minutes without apparently noticing that he had done so. Miriam watched her brother being happy with an emotion that was simple and genuine. He was going to be all right. She had always known it. She was simply glad that he knew it now too. On the drive back from dropping him at the station, she realized something that stopped her so completely that she sat in a car park for several minutes before she trusted herself to drive again. She realized that nothing terrible had happened. The months since the fundraiser, since she had started giving herself a Thursday, since she had replied to Edmund's message, since she had begun, incrementally and cautiously, to make small choices for herself, rather than against everyone else's needs. Nothing terrible had happened. Her mother was still here. Kofi was fine. Her work was still meaningful. The things she had been quietly afraid of, the unnamed fears that had lived in the walls of her self-sacrifice for 20 years, had not materialized. The fear, she understood, had not been that something bad would happen to the people she loved. The fear had been that she did not deserve to stop preventing it. That if she ever once stopped being the net beneath everyone, they would fall, and it would be her fault, and she would have to live with that. But she had not stopped being there. She had simply started being somewhere too. She drove home. She texted Edmund, still looking forward to April. He replied, quickly, so am I. She read it twice. She felt the thing in her chest again, the loosening. She put her phone in her bag and went into her flat and stood at the kitchen window in the early evening and looked at the street below, and this time, when she looked, she actually saw it. The buses. The trees coming back into bud. A child in a yellow coat running ahead of her father. An old man stopping to look at something in a shop window that made him smile to himself. She saw all of it. She stood there and let herself see it. It had been a long time since she had simply stood somewhere and let it be enough. The concert hall in Bristol was smaller than Maryam had imagined. She had pictured something formal and imposing, the kind of place you had to dress well for and sit up straight in. What she found instead was a low, warm-lit building on a side street, converted from what had once been a Victorian warehouse, with exposed brick walls and mismatched chairs set out in generous rows and a ceiling so high the sound would have nowhere to go except everywhere at once. Edmund was waiting at the entrance. He had a program for each of them. He handed hers over without ceremony, and asked if she had found parking, and when she said she had come by train, he nodded, as though this were the obvious correct decision. Better idea, he said. We can walk by the river after, if you like. There's a place that does very good coffee. It was a Tuesday evening in April, and the city was still holding the last of the daylight. Maryam had taken the afternoon train from Paddington. She had looked out of the window for most of the journey and not thought about her mother's medication, or Kofi's new flat, or anything that required her to be useful. She had looked at the fields and the sky, and eaten a sandwich she had bought from the station and thought, with a warm, uncomplicated pleasure, that she was going to a concert. The music that evening was a string quartet playing a program of Haydn and a contemporary piece by a composer Maryam had not heard of, a young woman from Edinburgh whose work, according to the program notes, drew on folk traditions in a way that was neither nostalgic nor ironic. Maryam read this description and was not entirely sure what it meant, but was curious about it. She understood, once the music began. The first piece, the Haydn, was familiar in the way of things you have not heard for years but that live somewhere in your body regardless. Maryam sat back in her chair and felt something unclench in her that she had not known was clenched. She breathed more slowly. The music moved through the room with the ease of something that has nothing to prove, and the audience received it in the respectful hush of people who understand they are in the presence of something that has survived time. Between pieces, Edmund leaned over and said, quietly, "What do you think?" "I'd forgotten," she said, and then stopped, because she was not sure how to finish the sentence. Forgotten what music sounded like when you had the time to listen to it. Forgotten what it felt like to sit somewhere for no reason except that you chose to. "Me too," he said, which was exactly the right thing to say. After the concert, they walked by the river as he had suggested. The city at night had a different quality than London at night, less urgent, more settled. They walked slowly, coffee cups warm in their hands, and talked about the music and about the city, and about the particular quality of the evening, cool without being cold, the kind of spring night that feels like a promise. He told her more about his daughter, whose name was Lily and who had, since the pottery class, also developed enthusiasms for astronomy, baking bread, and an extremely complicated card game she had taught herself from a YouTube video and then spent a month trying to teach to Edmund, with mixed results. Maryam asked about the card game. Edmund attempted to explain the rules. She laughed genuinely, which surprised her. Not a polite laugh, not a professional laugh, but the real kind that comes from somewhere deeper, that does not calculate itself before arriving. Edmund looked at her when she laughed, not in a way that was pointed or self-congratulatory, as though he had caused something, just in the way of a person seeing something that he found worth seeing. "You should do that more," he said. "Laugh. You look like a completely different person when you laugh," he said. "Not different bad, different good. Like the person who was standing very straight behind a counter has just stepped out from behind it." She looked at the river. "I've been behind a lot of counters," she said. "I know," he said. "I've noticed." They stood at the edge of the river for a long moment. The water moved dark and silver below them. Somewhere behind them, a restaurant's music drifted into the street and was gone again. Maryam thought about telling him something. She had been thinking about whether to tell him since February, since the car park outside Kofi Station, since the moment she had sat still long enough to understand what the last 20 years had actually been. "I left university at 19, she said, to come home. My mother was ill. I was going to go back and I never did." She said it plainly, the way Edmund said things. No performance of it, just the fact. He was quiet for a moment. What were you studying? Architecture, actually, she said. She had not said that word out loud in over a decade. It sat in the air between them. Edmund turned to look at her. His expression was not dramatic. It was simply thoughtful. Of course you were, he said. What does that mean? It means it makes complete sense, he said. It's the way you look at buildings. I've noticed you do that. You don't just look at them, you read them. She had not known that she did this, or she had known it, in the way you know things about yourself that no one ever names, and then someone names it and you feel a small, strange shock of recognition. I was good at it, she said. I think I was good at it. I think you probably still are, he said. She did not respond to that. She looked at the river, but she heard it, and she held it, and she did not brush it aside the way she brushed aside most things that were said to her in the direction of being something. Later, when she was on the train back to London, moving through the dark countryside with the window reflecting her own face back at her, she thought about the evening. She thought about the concert, and the river, and Edmund's voice saying the word architecture. She thought about Lily and the card game and the coffee that had gone lukewarm in her hands while they talked without noticing. She thought about how the evening had produced nothing, nothing useful, nothing solved, no one helped, no form filed, no arrangement made. It had been purely, entirely, without function. And it had been one of the best evenings she had spent in as long as she could remember. She let herself think that. She did not add a qualification after it. She just let it be true. She fell asleep on the train somewhere past Reading and woke up when the train pulled into Paddington, and she gathered her bag and walked through the station with the loose-limbed, rested feeling of someone who has spent an evening being entirely themselves. She was still 39. But she was beginning, very slowly and with a great deal of caution, to understand that 39 might not be the end of something. It might be the beginning. 2 months after the concert in Bristol, Miriam's brother called her on a Tuesday evening to tell her about a problem with a tenant arrangement in the family house. Their mother had apparently agreed to let a distant cousin stay in the spare room for a few weeks while he looked for work, and the few weeks had become 3 months, and the cousin was now being difficult about contributing to household expenses, and Kofi thought Miriam should come over and talk to their mother about it. Miriam was standing in her kitchen when he called. She had plans on Thursday, nothing formal, just a plan she had made for herself. A small gallery she had been meaning to visit for weeks. A walk along the canal afterward if the weather held. She had written it in her diary in ink, which was something she had started doing, writing her own plans in ink as though they were appointments, as though her own time had the same weight as someone else's emergency. She listened to Kofi. The situation was real. Her mother did sometimes need help navigating these things. The cousin was a genuine problem. She also noticed, and this noticing was new, that the situation did not actually require her specifically. Kofi was in Birmingham, yes, but he could make a phone call. There was a family friend in Peckham who had known Grace for 30 years and who had handled more difficult conversations than this one. The situation was, in the language she had spent 2 decades speaking fluently, manageable without her. She said, "Kofi, I think you can call Auntie Patricia about this." There was a pause. "What?" he said. "Patricia has known Mum longer than either of us," she said. "She's good with this kind of thing. Give her a call." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "I just have some things on this week that I'd like to keep to." She could feel him on the other end of the line, recalibrating. Kofi was not a bad person. He was not demanding or deliberately thoughtless. He was simply a person who had grown up in the belief that certain things got handled by a certain person, and the rearrangement of that belief was genuinely surprising to him. "Right," he said finally. "Okay, I'll call Patricia." She hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment. Her heart was beating a little faster than usual, not with guilt, not with the sick lurch of having let someone down, with something sharper and cleaner than that, the feeling of having held a line. She texted Edmund, "I just kept a Thursday for myself. First time in, I don't know, a long time." He replied within a few minutes, "How did it feel?" She thought about this. She typed back, like something that should have been ordinary but felt enormous. His reply came, "That's usually how it goes. The ordinary things we forget to do end up being the largest ones to reclaim." She read this several times. Then she put the phone down and finished making her dinner, and ate it sitting at the actual table, rather than standing at the counter, which was another small thing she had started doing, sitting down to eat, as though the meal were something worth attending to. The Thursday came. The gallery was small and thoughtful, the kind of place that gives each piece enough room to breathe. She walked through it slowly, alone, with her phone in her bag. She looked at things without purpose, without the project of understanding them fully or being able to explain them to someone else. She just looked. One painting stopped her completely. It was a landscape, a wide, flat plain under a very big sky, in colors that were subtle without being muted. The plain was empty. The sky was doing something complicated with light. There was no story in it, no narrative. There was only space. She stood in front of it for a long time. She felt, looking at it, a kind of recognition, the recognition of a person who has been in a very enclosed space for a very long time, and has only just understood that enclosed spaces are not the natural condition of things. She bought a small print of it from the gallery shop. She carried it home on the train. She hung it on the wall of her flat when she got home, in the space that had held a mirror she had never liked. She stood back and looked at it and felt the flat change slightly, not dramatically but enough. A room that shows you the space you could occupy is different from a room that only reflects you back at yourself. Edmund came to London again in June. He did not have a meeting this time. He came because they had arranged it, specifically, as a thing to do together. He had suggested a market in Greenwich that Lily had visited on a school trip and not stopped talking about since, and Miriam had agreed that a market in Greenwich sounded good, and so they went. Lily was there too, this being the first time she had met Miriam, and this had required some internal preparation on Miriam's part that she had not admitted to Edmund. Children, she found, were easy to be wrong with. They had very precise detectors for the performance of interest. You either were actually interested in them or you were not, and they knew the difference in about 30 seconds. Lily was a small, round-faced girl with an extremely serious expression that occasionally broke into a grin of completely unreasonable wattage. She shook Miriam's hand when they were introduced, which Edmund had clearly not coached, and then she looked at Miriam for a long moment with the assessing directness of a child who does not yet know she is supposed to be subtle about such things. "My dad says you help people," Lily said. "I do," Miriam said. "What kind of people?" "People who are trying to figure out a complicated thing. I help them figure it out." Lily considered this. "I'm trying to figure out the card game," she said. "Dad keeps getting the resource rule wrong." Miriam glanced at Edmund, who was looking at the sky with the expression of a man pretending not to hear. "Tell me the resource rule," Miriam said. The market was 3 hours. Lily spent approximately 45 minutes explaining the card game, another 20 on the relative merits of various bread rolls at a bakery stall, and the remainder in the happy, unfocused way of children who have decided they are among safe company. She walked between Miriam and Edmund for most of it, occasionally taking each of their hands for a few steps before letting go again, which she did without self-consciousness, and which Miriam received in the same spirit. At one point, Lily went ahead to look at a stall selling wooden toys, and Edmund and Miriam walked together for a moment in the comfortable quiet that had become, over the previous months, one of the things she valued most about his company. Not the talking, though the talking was good. The quiet, the way neither of them needed to fill it. "She likes you," Edmund said. "She likes that I was willing to hear about the card game. She told me last week that she hoped you were nice in real life," he said. "That's her highest standard." Miriam looked at Lily, who was holding up a small carved elephant and tilting it back and forth to look at it from every angle. "She's remarkable," she said. "I know," he said, and said it the way parents say things about their children when they are not performing pride but simply stating a fact they consider obvious. On the train home that evening, Miriam thought about the day and the way she had started to think about the days that mattered, turning them over carefully, looking at them from every side. She had not been useful today, not once. She had not solved anything, or managed anything, or anticipated anything. She had walked around a market and listened to a child explain a card game, and eaten a bread roll standing up in the sunshine, and talked to Edmund about nothing in particular, and everything that seemed worth mentioning. She had been, purely and simply, there. It struck her, sitting on the train, that this was not a small thing to have learned. It struck her that 21 years of being somewhere specific for a specific purpose had made her forget that simply being somewhere, without purpose, was its own kind of gift. Not to anyone else, to herself. She was 39 years old and 5 months. Her birthday was in September. She thought about September with a feeling she could not quite name. Something anticipatory. Something that faced forward rather than back. The train moved through the city. The lights of London came up around her. She looked at them with the particular feeling of someone who is beginning, slowly and irreversibly, to come home to themselves. September arrived the way good things often arrive, without announcement, and all at once. Miriam turned 40 on a Saturday. The date was not remarkable. She had known for a year it was coming. She had spent years treating her birthdays with the same practical efficiency she applied to everything else. a small acknowledgement, a card from her mother, perhaps a dinner out with a friend or two, and then back to the ordinary run of things, as though the day had asked nothing more of her than any other day. This birthday was different from the moment she woke up. She woke up in Bristol. Edmund had, over the course of several months and with great care, suggested that she might like to spend her birthday there. He had not made it an occasion. He had simply said, at some point in the spring, that if she ever wanted to spend a birthday somewhere that was not her own flat with its practical cushions and its sealed jar of hand cream, Bristol in September was a reasonable option, and his spare room was there if she needed it. She had agreed, eventually, in the way she had started to agree to things, which was to say after sitting with the resistance long enough to understand that the resistance was a habit rather than a judgment, and then moving through it. She woke in the spare room, which Edmund had furnished with the same quiet, unfussy attention he brought to most things. The bed was comfortable. There were fresh flowers on the small table by the window. She lay there for a moment before she got up, looking at the ceiling, feeling the day. She was 40 years old. The number sat in her mind without the weight she had expected. She had thought it might feel like a verdict. Instead, it felt like a fact, simple and clean. She was 40. She had been 39. She would be 41. The number was not the point. She got up and went downstairs to find Edmund already in the kitchen, which smelled of coffee and something warm in the oven. He was standing at the counter with a tea towel over his shoulder, reading something on his phone with the composed expression of a man who has successfully organized something and is choosing not to appear particularly pleased about it. "Good morning," he said. "It smells extraordinary in here," she said. "That's the Ghanaian spiced bread," he said. "Lily helped me find the recipe. I cannot confirm whether the result is accurate, but I can confirm it smells correct." Miriam stopped walking. "You made Ghanaian spiced bread." Lily wanted to. She did most of the work. I supervised the oven. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at this man who had made Ghanaian spiced bread for her birthday because his 8-year-old daughter had wanted to, and he had let her, and she felt something very large and very quiet happen inside her chest. She did not say anything for a moment. Edmund looked up from his phone and saw her face and did not comment on it, which was exactly right. "Coffee's ready," he said. She sat at the kitchen table and he poured the coffee, and the morning light came through the window and sat on the table between them. And the bread smelled like something she had not smelled since childhood, since Saturday mornings in her mother's kitchen, before everything that came after. Lily arrived mid-morning with Edmund's mother, who had driven her over. She bounded in with the energy of a child who has been waiting to deliver something and can no longer contain herself, and she placed a lumpy parcel on the table in front of Miriam with the ceremony of someone presenting a state document. "I made it," she said. "It's a bowl." "Of course it is," Miriam said. The bowl was not, technically, a successful bowl. It was wider on one side than the other, with a rim that went up and down in a way that was clearly unintentional, and it had been painted in a very vigorous application of blue and gold that suggested the painter had been having an extremely good time. It was entirely impractical and completely perfect. "It's for your keys," Lily said, "or your rings, or whatever. The things you put down when you come home." Miriam held the bowl in both hands. She thought about all the coming home she had done in her life, all the setting down at the end of days spent in service of something beyond herself, and she thought about what it meant that the thing she was being given now was a place to set things down and finally, properly, be home. "It's the best thing I've ever been given," she said, and meant it completely. Lily looked satisfied. "I knew the shape was fine," she said, which made Miriam laugh, and Edmund's mother laugh, and Edmund look at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has given up fighting a losing battle. The rest of the day had the quality of good days that are not trying to be extraordinary and become extraordinary anyway. They ate lunch in the garden, a proper long lunch that Edmund had planned and prepared with the particular care of a man who understands that feeding people is a way of telling them they matter. There was bread, and there were 3 kinds of salad, and there were things from the market, and there was a cake that Lily had decorated with such enthusiasm that the writing on it was almost entirely illegible, though the intention was clearly "Happy Birthday, Miriam." Miriam sat at the garden table and looked around at the people who had come because they wanted to, and she felt the day settle around her like something earned. There was Edmund's mother, who was warm and direct and had a quality Miriam had started to notice in people who had moved through very hard things and come out steadier. There was a friend of Edmund's from his university years, a man named Patrick who worked in education, and who had the talent of being funny without ever seeming to try. There was a colleague of Miriam's named Ruth, whom she had called on a Thursday afternoon and asked to come down to Bristol for a birthday, which was the kind of thing Miriam had never done before, calling someone to say please come and mark a day with me, and Ruth had said yes immediately, and with such genuine warmth, that it had taken Miriam a moment to recover from it. Ruth had been Miriam's colleague for 7 years. She had tried many times over those 7 years to get Miriam to come to her house for dinner, to attend a birthday, to go out after work on a Friday. Miriam had always had reasons. She did not tell Ruth this at the birthday lunch. She simply looked at her across the table and felt grateful in a way she had not earned yet, and was beginning to understand she was allowed to feel anyway. After lunch, Lily fell asleep on a chair in the garden with the sudden, total unconsciousness of children who have expended everything they had. Edmund's mother took the chair opposite and read a book. Patrick and Ruth discovered they had opinions about the same obscure documentary, and went into a lengthy conversation about it that nobody else could follow. Edmund sat down next to Miriam with 2 cups of tea. They sat and let the afternoon be around them. The garden was not large, but it was full, with the layered greenness of something tended over years. A late bee moved from flower to flower with unhurried purpose. The light had the particular quality of September afternoons, warm but already carrying inside it the knowledge that it would not last, which made it feel like something to hold carefully. "I've been thinking," Miriam said. Edmund waited. "I've been thinking about correspondence courses," she said, "in architecture. Not to become an architect, I'm past the point of training for that from scratch. But there are courses. Design history. Conservation principles. Things like that." She had looked this up on a Thursday. She had written the names of programs in her notebook alongside the gallery visit and the canal walk. She had written them in ink. "I just want to understand the thing I walked away from," she said. "Not to grieve it, just to know what it is, what I was good at." Edmund held his teacup in both hands. He looked at the garden. "I know a few people in the field," he said. "If you ever want a conversation with someone working in it." "I might," she said. "In a while. Whenever you're ready," he said. This was the thing about Edmund that she had been trying to find words for over the course of the past year. He did not accelerate things. He did not make her need to be further along than she was. He placed things within her reach and left them there, and never made her feel the distance between herself and them. He understood that she had spent 21 years operating at someone else's pace, in someone else's direction, and that relearning her own direction was something that could not be hurried. She had started to understand that this quality in him was not patience exactly. It was respect. A steady, deliberate respect for the fact that she was a person with her own internal landscape that was not his to map. She thought about a thing he had said to her once, early on, when she had apologized for talking too long about something she cared about. He had said, very simply, "You don't have to apologize for taking up space. You're not too much. You've just been in rooms that were too small for you." She had not forgotten this. She had written it down, at home, in the notebook. The afternoon stretched around them. Lily woke up and immediately resumed a conversation she had apparently been having in her sleep, something about the card game and a rule she had revised. Edmund's mother looked at Miriam over the rim of her book and smiled with the particular smile of a person who recognizes something good taking its proper shape. Ruth leaned across the table and asked Miriam what she was thinking about, because Ruth had known her long enough to recognize a silence that was full rather than empty. "I'm thinking," Miriam said, and then she stopped and looked at the garden and the people in it, and the tea in her hands, and the blue and gold bowl sitting on the table where Lily had placed it. The little impractical beautiful bowl that held things down when you came home. "I'm thinking that I didn't know it was going to feel like this," she said, "being 40. "How does it feel?" Ruth asked. Miriam thought about it. She thought about the past year, the gallery and the river and the concert hall and the train journeys, and the Thursdays she had started to keep for herself, and the mornings she had sat in a car park outside a train station, and understood that nothing terrible had happened. She thought about the green dress in the church hall in Lewisham, and a man with a quiet face who noticed the things other people walked past. She thought about her mother, who loved her in the way of things that were assumed, and about Kofi, who was going to be all right, and about the university letter that had been open on the kitchen table when she was 19 years old, and about the architecture she had walked away from, and about the woman she had been for 21 years and would always in some ways remain, because you do not stop being who you had to be. You simply begin to be more than that. She thought about the painting of the wide flat plain and the big sky that now hung on the wall of her flat, in the space where the mirror had been. "Like space," she said, finally. "Like I've been in a very small room for a very long time, and someone left the door open." Ruth looked at her and nodded slowly. "And?" she said. Miriam looked at Edmund, who was looking at the garden with the easy calm of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. She looked at Lily, who had fallen back into the card game explanation and was demonstrating a rule to Edmund's mother with extreme seriousness. She looked at the bowl on the table, the impractical, perfect, blue and gold bowl. "And I walked out," she said. She said it simply, no drama in it, no performance, just the plain fact of it, delivered in the quiet voice of a woman who has finally, at 40, given herself permission to be the subject of her own life, rather than the supporting figure in everyone else's. The afternoon held them all. The light moved slowly across the garden as it does in September, unhurried, knowing itself to be temporary and choosing, for that reason, to be beautiful while it lasted. Miriam put down her teacup. Edmund reached across the table and filled it again, first, on purpose. She watched him do it and did not say thank you, not because she was not grateful, but because thank you was too small a word for what it meant to have someone, finally, hand you something before you had to ask. She just let it be what it was, which was, without complication, enough.